here in South Florida, or some part of the southern U.S., is getting a strong hurricane. Any chance you're doing the weather manipulation? He says. I know it's the topic for tonight's show. Well, to some degree, that's true. Coming up in the next hour, we'll have Nick Begich here, Dr. Begich, who wrote, of course, among other things, Angels Don't Play This Harp. Now, I'll have a lot of questions about that, as you can imagine. It's been a while since we've talked. The Bell family is just spiffy. That would be Art, myself, Ramona, Yeti, Comet, Shadow, Dusty, Abydos. And by the way, Abydos is in tonight's Hamcam slot. That's Abby lying right on Ramona last night. So that's as early a picture as last night. Now, take a good look at Abydos, because after about 8 o'clock tomorrow, his maleness, his male identity is due to be modified. So these are the closing hours of his continued possession of, I kind of feel sorry for him. Any male. Anyway, so there he was last night. What an unusual little cat that is. He doesn't make a sound, folks. He's never made any sound other than when he wanted to come in the house, and then he screamed bloody murder. Since then, 2.5 months, the most he does, he goes, he grunts. That's about it. That's all Abydos ever says. Now, I would like to invite you all, as I have in the past, to listen to amateur radio, ham radio, at a very unique site called www.smeter.net. That's SMETER.net. It's there 24 hours a day. One of the receivers is the Pahrump receiver, which is located at KNYE Radio and utilizes the KNYE tower. And you can listen to shortwave. Now, warning, there may not be too much shortwave to listen to right now. The solar conditions at the moment are really, really unusual. They are so unusual. In fact, if you look at the X-ray chart, it's flat-lined. I mean, baby, there's nothing going on. It is just flat-lined, and the band sounds just like that, so it's very difficult for anybody to talk to anybody anywhere, but it can be done. So you can have fun with that. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. www.smeter.net, SMETER.net. Now, we just got back from a trip to Idaho, took the RV up to Idaho, and had a blast. Went to see a friend of mine, Mac, and Boyd and his family, and we had a blast, so we're getting out a little bit. Coming up next week is going to be a kind of a fun affair, I think. Ghost to Ghost is not one day next week, but it's 2 days. Here's what we're going to do. On the 30th, we're going to have a very old Ghost to Ghost. They're going back, I think, to the mid-'90s or early 90s. I don't know, way back, and they're getting a Ghost to Ghost because those stories, of course, are eternal, aren't they? And then on the 31st, I will be here doing a live Ghost to Ghost. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about that live Ghost to Ghost, all right? Continuing program notes here. What I would like you to do is to send me a short synopsis of your ghost story, the most titillating part, so that I can understand what I'm dealing with, and include your phone number, please, because we will repeat last year's successful effort at Ghost to Ghost, and I'm going to give you my email addresses, so run and get a pencil or a pen, please, and send me a short synopsis of your ghost story. Only the very best, scariest, wildest stories are told. And the way this is accomplished, by your sending me a little bit of email, including your phone number, and I will call you. All right, so any emails with your short synopsis and phone number should be sent to artbell, ARTBELL, at AOL.com or artbell at mindspring.com. That's probably the main one, artbell at mindspring.com, MINDSPRING, artbell at mindspring.com. And again, include a synopsis and your phone number, and if it's a good one, we'll call you on the 31st, and that's how we're going to do Ghost to Ghost. That, and of course, open lines as well. But we are going to rely heavily on your input, so make it good and include your phone number, and who knows, you could be part of this year's Ghost to Ghost program, something I've been doing for, an awful lot of years now. In a moment, we'll look at this horrible thing, this horrid thing, bearing down at this very hour on Florida, the Keys, and then Florida. Coming up. CNN, of course, into full-time coverage. The latest on Wilma at this hour at 24.5 north and 83.6 west, or about 115 miles west of Key West, Florida, which is now beginning to take quite a battering. Winds are now 115 miles an hour. It's been upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane, moving northeast at 18 miles an hour. The barometric pressure, 957 millibars, and I understand stabilizing at that, so it may remain exactly where it is, a Category 3. Now, you may recall from previous programs, I've turned to Mark Suddeth, who is a hurricane hunter. You've got to be out of your mind, in my opinion, to do these kinds of things, though I certainly did earlier in my life, didn't I? Mark was in Naples, Florida, but I guess he decided that wasn't dangerous enough. So now we find him, I believe, in Everglades City. Mark, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Art.
Is that right, Everglades City?
Yes, temporarily. We've come down here to rewind a tape that is inside of one of these storm case boxes, excuse me, that we have learned a lot of lessons since Katrina. We lost all of those cases that we set up during Katrina.
All right, to remind the audience, what Mark does is he sets up these little, pods or cases that he leaves with video and other recording devices to, actually be in the hurricane and take the brunt of it and record whatever it's going to record. Generally correct, Mark?
Yes, that's exactly right. These are sort of remotely operated cameras and weather instruments. That's the idea, is to leave them out in a remote location and let them take the beating and not me. And we're going to go back. We're in Everglades City now, just kind of rewinding the very long 9-hour tape in one of these items, one of these boxes. And so far, as I drive around Everglades City, there's no flooding yet whatsoever.
Well, Mark, it's coming. Now, where are you that city, Everglades City, probably is not going to be the place to be come about dawn, is it?
Right. Not going to be a place to be near dawn. I think the storm surge is going to come in rather quickly, like it did during Katrina. The people that are still here, and there are people here, the indication of that, I'm going to take some pictures of it as I leave, and I hope it's not pictures of cars that don't have owners, but there's all these automobiles parked up on the little bridge that comes down into Everglades City. Mm-hmm. They're parked up there like rats that have been placed on higher ground, if you will, and that to me means that the owners are still here in Everglades City, which is about 3 feet above sea level on average.
3 feet above sea level. And what is the projected storm surge there?
Anywhere from maybe 12 to 15 feet.
12 to 15 feet. So in other words, you could get as much as 12 feet of water right there.
Yes, we can have 12, maybe 15 feet of water rising in here, coming in rapidly. That'll have some waves on top of it, perhaps. And it's just not a good thing to be in. I learned that
Oh, that's
seeing the
that's
damage after Katrina.
yeah, that's very interesting. So the residents of that area have all parked their cars. You would judge how far above sea level?
Well, those cars are not very much above sea level at all. They are
Oh,
parked up on this bridge, so they are maybe another 8 or 9 feet above sea level
I see.
where they are. So the cars may not get damaged or washed away, but the people's homes with those people may be. So I'm really worried about that.
I know there are a lot of areas that didn't really evacuate this time. Some people seem to have this feeling that, I don't know, this storm wasn't going to be much. And after the battering over Cozumel in that area of Mexico, I think people thought it was going to beat itself to death. What is going on with this storm? Intensification, I guess, right?
It's an amazing hurricane, isn't it, Art? It was the strongest hurricane ever recorded pressure-wise in the Western Hemisphere, with a 881 or 882 millibar air pressure at one point,
Right.
with a 2-mile wide eye, and then it buried itself over the Yucatan after going through an eye wall replacement cycle, and the eye grew larger. It battered them for hours upon hours. Then it moved off the Yucatan after leaving southern Florida in a state of weight and anguish, however, giving people more time, which was good. The talk was maybe it'll just be an 80-knot hurricane, and so it won't be as bad. And then all of a sudden, 6 hours before landfall here, we're looking at a large, angry, well-defined Category 3 hurricane with a huge wind field, a lot like Katrina had, a large wind field. So this means a large area.
What happened?
The southwest Florida coast will get storm surge.
Yeah, Mark, what, if you can, what happened to this hurricane to cause it to suddenly grow like this? Was it the warm waters of the Gulf? I mean, they just didn't expect it to be a 3. They were forecasting originally 1, maybe,
right,
2 at the most, and here it is 3 already.
Correct. That just goes to show that the intensity forecasting for a hurricane is very difficult to understand. That thermodynamic relationship between the hurricane's interface with the ocean and the atmosphere. They were hoping that the shearing winds would tear it apart and keep it from strengthening, but the hurricane was moving with the flow, so the shear was not as bad.
Yeah, I heard, Mark, that the shear could do one of two things. It could either confuse and weaken the hurricane, or it could cause it to change its forward speed instead, while it's still strengthened. Apparently that's what occurred.
Right, and the eye grew larger, as we have seen. The hurricane has picked up a fairly fast speed now, and it'll be on the coast somewhere near when the sun comes up. And I think that is going to be one rude awakening, no pun intended.
All right, so it's going to be moving over the Everglades area. Basically, we're talking about a swamp anyway, with swamp water temperatures still in the 80s, and then it's going to move over to the east coast of Florida. Over
a lot of people in Miami-Dade, Broward County, and then all the way up towards Palm Beach, even up as far north as Titusville, could see hurricane-force winds. That's a lot of people, millions of people that are going to be affected by this hurricane.
Mark, do you have any personal theories about the hurricane season thus far this year? I mean, it's been, everybody I think would agree, it's been incredible. We're already up now to a named storm, Alpha. Do you have any theories about why you think it's been this bad, and is it going to get worse?
I think that it is very reasonable to say that it was this bad because the sea surface temperatures were warmer than normal, and in some cases extreme warmer than normal, and that has led to, as you mentioned during Hurricane Katrina, these hurricanes are nature's air conditioners, and boy, nature really had to crank up these air conditioners this year because hurricanes are the means to get that heat out of the tropics. And in this particular situation this year, it is absolutely the most extraordinary hurricane season in modern man's history. I mean, this cannot be, 1933 had a 21-name storm year, but it didn't have 3 Category 5 hurricanes like we've had this year.
That's right.
That is absolutely amazing.
It truly is amazing, and it just seems to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So it would be your view then that this trend toward bigger, more fierce hurricanes is going to continue in years to come?
Yes, it's very possible when we see these kind of water temperatures persisting, and we're going to watch that through the winter, that large, fierce hurricanes could be the norm as opposed to the exception, and it is not going to be too much longer, I think, before a place like Long Island gets a massive hurricane racing up the East Coast and comes into some place like Long Island. New Orleans has a threat to be hit again even next year. The Carolinas are vulnerable. The Florida Peninsula is very vulnerable. We are stuck with this, Art, and if we do not adapt as people that live along the coastline, there's going to be some very bad consequences for this country in the next 10 to 15 years.
Hey, Mark, just a theoretical question. Could this hurricane cross the Florida Peninsula, get out into the Atlantic, and meet up with the low pressure or tropical alpha thing and then sort of merge? Could that happen?
Yes, it really could. And it would absorb some of the energy from alpha and perhaps be transitioning. It's going to transition into a very strong sort of mid-latitude extratropical cyclone, or more of a nor'easter, like a winter-type storm.
Right.
And then head up towards the Canadian Maritimes, where it's going to potentially cause a lot of trouble up there. This is going to be a very large and potent ocean storm after it's done and it leaves the tropics.
Well, listen, you do leave out these pods with recording equipment, some of it video, so I'm sure that you're hoping in a way that you get some daylight-type action, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're hoping that we can see what these effects are during the hurricane, because the daytime comes in and allows us to do that. That's obviously a very good thing. And for anybody that has stayed here in the Everglades City area, maybe the daytime will allow them a chance, if they see that water coming up, to finally get out of here. I don't know. I just think a hurricane is much more bearable during the daytime, and we can learn a lot more from it if we can see it. Makes a lot of sense.
Why, Mark, do you chase hurricanes?
That is a very good question. I am very interested in this kind of power that makes these trees move like they do, that makes the noise that it does, that makes millions of people react, in a way that they wouldn't normally react to just a thunderstorm or a cold front coming.
So you're entranced by the power.
Right, and absolutely. And if hurricanes did not hurt people and kill people and destroy billions of dollars worth of property, everybody could come out and enjoy a really spectacular force of nature. But unfortunately, they do those bad things. And as I said a few minutes ago, people have got to learn to adapt.
All right, we're about done here, Mark, time-wise. But very quickly, go ahead and plug your website, would you please? Because Mark is, doing this kind of as a job, right, Mark?
This is my job. It is, and I work with some great people. Folks can visit hurricanetrack.com, and one of the things I want to mention real quick, if you want to see this season end to end from A to W, I was there for almost every one of them except Cindy. We're producing a DVD that is going to be absolutely incredible, and I'm going to send you one, Art, through your good friend Paul Bowman, and folks can look that all up at hurricanetrack.com. We really are the science behind the reporting. And, Art, from your storm chasing days that the science really makes the chasing and the adventure a full plate, and it really helps to round it all out.
Oh, Mark, I know. Your streaming was cool, by the way. Paul Bowman, as you mentioned, turned me on to it, and I watched you going down the coast of Florida, headed into danger the other day. Just watched your vehicle, going on down the freeway. It was pretty cool. And I could even hear you in the background. So technology's done a lot for us, and you're square in the middle of it. So, Mark Sudduth, buddy, thank you very much for being here once again as we're on the air yet another night when a hurricane's closing in. Rain pounded Key West late Sunday as Hurricane Wilma accelerated towards storm-weary, that's an understatement, Florida, threatening residents with 115-mile-an-hour winds, tornadoes. Oh, there are going to be a lot of tornadoes because there's cold air to the north, and it's mixing, and they're already getting tornadoes and water spouts, a surge of seawater that could flood the Keys, the state's southwest coast. The Category 3 hurricane expected to make landfall before dawn Monday in the state's southwest corner, likely near Naples and Marco Island, according to Max Mayfield. So we'll see. It's certainly going to go across the swampy southern part of Florida, and then the eastern part of the state is going to take it. There's looting down in Mexico after Wilma, which, of course, stayed over the Cancun area and just rotated, and now things are pretty wrecked down there, as you might imagine. About 10,000 Americans have got to get out, and there is looting. We'll have more in a. There's so many things that I want to talk to you about. I get so little airtime as compared to when I was on for both days each weekend, that there's just a whole lot I want to talk to you about. One of those things, even in the middle of a hurricane, is bird flu. So stay right there, and we shall continue. Open lines coming right up. This is a subject I have just got to take a moment to talk to you about. The headline tonight is Britain, bird flu is deadly H5N1 strain. London. The British government said Sunday that a strain of bird flu that killed a parrot in quarantine is, in fact, the deadly H5N1 strain that has plagued Asia and recently spread now, of course, to Europe. Scientists determined that the parrot imported from South America died of, in fact, the strain of avian flu that has devastated poultry stocks, killed 61 people in Asia over the past 2 years. Now, I've been doing a lot of reading about the bird flu. And as you know, or should know, if you've had your head anywhere other than deep in the sand, this is thought to probably very soon now jump to, or possibly jump to, the possibility of human-to-human infection, should that occur. I've read the mortality rate for this kind of flu is about 55%. 55%. Now, in the 1918 flu epidemic, I think it was 5 or 10% at the most. 5% is what I've heard. That went around the world 3 times in an era where we had no airplanes. No airplanes. Killed millions and millions of people. This is worse. Much worse. If you hear a story, a legitimate story, that says that human-to-human contamination of this H5N1 has begun, all I can tell you is find a place away from people. And I know it sounds impossible to do, but I mean, for you and your family, for your sake, find a place as far away from people as you can get, with as much storage of food and water and essentials as you can possibly manage, and stay the hell away from people. And that's about all you can do. There are some drugs that might have some effectiveness against this strain, should it develop. Tamiflu, for example, but stocks are low on that. So, you keep this one way high on your personal radar for you and the sake of your family. Keep it very high on your radar. If you begin to hear about person-to-person transmission, the time available to you to get ready and do what you're going to do for you and your family is going to be very short indeed. So keep your eye on that one. It may not come. It may not be this year. It may not be next year. Or it could be next month. But keep it very high on your personal radar, please. All right, let us begin. On the international line, you're on the air. Hello, where are you calling from, please?
Yes, hi, Art. I'm calling from Singapore.
Singapore?
Yes.
Wonderful. All the way from Singapore. My goodness.
That's correct, yeah.
What are you doing in Singapore?
I've been living and working here for 20 years. Came over with an American company and then ended up starting my own and stayed.
So you really like Singapore?
Yeah, we raised 4 children here. It's been a good time. It's nothing like you hear.
What do you do? I mean, what kind of work?
Semiconductor testing.
Very good.
All the good stuff. In fact, I wanted to call you on my mobile phone just to let you see how great it was, but the calls are a little bit expensive.
Oh, okay. You're in Singapore. I was just talking about the Asian flu. Are you getting a lot of headlines about that in Singapore, sir?
It's more from the BBC. BBC is the dominant news here in terms of our international, but locally, no, because I think it's really not that bad in terms of how many times it needs to jump in order to really become a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we went through the whole SARS thing, which was really devastating to the economy, a really tough time for everybody. I think at least a third of the restaurants shut down.
This thing could make SARS look like a picnic.
Well, it could. There's no doubt about it. And, as long as you cook your chicken right and you do all the right precautions, it shouldn't be too much.
Oh, absolutely. In its current form, where, only people coming in contact with eating birds or, bodily fluids from birds or something, it's not going to be the kind of thing that I'm concerned about. Human to human, if that begins...
Yes. Okay, then it's a totally different deal.
Yeah, I'll say. And the scientists seem so damn convinced that it's going to happen.
Well, George had somebody on his show last week about that. I think if you try to pin the guy down and get him to commit to anything, it might be a different deal.
Well, yeah, indeed. Listen, it's great to hear from you. What part of Singapore are you in?
Well, right now I'm in Kelang area. It's an industrial building. We stay up in the woodlands near the border to Malaysia. We're about 5 minutes from there.
Mm-hmm. And out of curiosity, how did you get onto the program, and how do you manage to hear it in Singapore?
Well, when I moved from the States, I used to listen to talk radio in Houston, and got over here and signed up for Reel and searched for talk radio and found this show called Art Bell and listened to it, and I was really hooked because it's been the strangest journey in a way.
It has.
My wife and I went to a place in Houston that had some soothsayers, and there was 2 of them, one a palm reader and one a card reader.
Mm-hmm.
Went to the one, and she said, "You're going to move overseas in the next 6 months," and I couldn't possibly think of what that meant. Went over to the other one, and she said the exact same thing. And, you kind of look to make sure nobody can see anybody from across the room, and they're completely blocked off.
And there you are in Singapore.
And here I am in Singapore all these years later.
Got it. All right, well, listen, buddy, I got a scoop, but thank you very, very much for your call, and take care in Singapore. That's an unusual call. All the way from Singapore. Yes, I think, once again, with the bird flu, don't worry until you hear about human-to-human transmission. If you hear about that, worry indeed and prepare for the worst. It's always best that way because the scientists surely do seem confirmed that just this small genetic change, what they say is that every human that is infected from a bird, of course, then has a compromised immune system, and there's always this chance that in just one human, it's suddenly going to take that one little tiny, almost immeasurable jump that will allow it to become human to human as just one little genetic change in the virus. That's scary. First time caller line, you're on the air. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, Art.
Yes.
First off, it's an honor to talk with you. I've been a fan of the show for about 2 or 3 years now.
Okay, where are you, sir?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Excellent.
I have a question, and I wanted to make a prediction after that, if I may.
Okay. You may.
My question is, has 2 existing hurricanes ever kind of caught up with each other and, joined to make a bigger storm? Has that ever happened? Do we have any records of that?
I have no idea. I've never personally heard of it, but most things have happened, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay.
I mean, they're both giant low-pressure systems, right? So I would think it could happen that we had that perfect storm off the northeast coast years ago where two low-pressure systems joined. So, yeah, I suppose why not?
Okay. Leading into my prediction, I was having a daydream the other day. I was just kind of dozing off during class, and I was in Florida. I was on vacation, and it was kind of around the end of August, mid-September, like when school usually starts. And I had this dream about an existing hurricane kind of like joining with another hurricane, kind of like catching up to it.
Right.
And forming a bigger storm.
Right.
And I was watching the Weather Channel about this in my dream, and it was slated for this period around 2006, and I was just kind of a little startled by it. And
all right, so you think that this might occur in 2006?
Correct, end of August, mid-September.
All right, well, nature may trump you, and who knows? I mean, Wilma is headed across southern Florida, right, in a northeast direction right now, and then probably to turn more northerly, I would imagine, after crossing the peninsula, and Alpha's out there sort of waiting, so you never know. Wildcard line, you're on the air.
Hi, Art. It's Larry in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, Fort Lauderdale. All right, well, I guess Fort Lauderdale is dead in the sights of this hurricane after it crosses, and it's not going to diminish that much. What are you being told?
Well, we're all glued to the television set. All channels have different little pictures on it, and we're watching Doppler radar from Key West, where they're flashing the different reporters that they have from Key West, Upper Keys, and all throughout South Florida. They're trying to tell people not to get complacent because of all the storms we've been battered with, and that's been a real problem, is dealing with the complacency.
Sure.
Right now here in Fort Lauderdale, everything is very, very calm. It's the calm before the storm. The winds are only about 35 miles an hour. The pictures we're seeing from Key West is they're just starting to get their hurricane-force winds with the eye approximately, maybe wrong on this, 60, 70 miles from them right now, and it's probably just going to skirt them, but it's still on that D line headed right for between like Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And they're saying that it's not going to diminish like the other hurricanes did. They think it's going to keep its strong Category 3.
That's right. So that means that conceivably your area and Miami-Dade North could see 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Well, 115 is what it's at right now. And like you said before, a lot of people think when it hits land, it diminishes, but the Everglades is basically warm water, which can help fuel it. But there's two caveats that we have here, two good things. One is it's moving very fast. They said that unlike some other storms, it'll move off the coast very rapidly. They expect it to maybe increase to 20 miles an hour in its movement. And the second thing is, if we lose power, and we seem to always lose power, it won't have that horrible hot weather afterwards. They're predicting the low temperatures, and for us it's low up to or down to 50 degrees by tomorrow night. So if we do lose power, we won't be baking.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have these aluminum shutters on, and you're like a baked potato with this aluminum, surrounding the house, which I put up today.
Even so, sir, just a few minutes of 100-mile-an-hour plus winds, that's going to do all kinds of damage. I mean, even if it's not sitting on you sustained, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of 100 miles an hour, and there's serious damage.
This is why I put up the shutters, but I have to say the house next door to me, they have even stronger shutters. They didn't do it. A neighbor next to him did put them up. It's just people trying to play the guessing game, and they've been begging people, especially in the Keys, to get out. A lot of people did not. They've been interviewing people that are still on their boats even.
I know, hard-headed conchs. They call them conchs. And the conchs don't leave. They stand and face the storm like brave soldiers.
They're even saying that when this thing goes offshore to the east, that it may merge to some type of general weather system with Tropical Storm Alpha, go up to the northeast, and actually turn into a very wicked snowstorm. So, I mean, it's like out of a movie script or like something out of your book. I mean, if you look at what this thing did, going underneath Cuba, swinging back around, and now, heading across the southern into Florida and then going up and wreaking havoc in the Northeast. I mean, it's like something out of a movie.
It is like something out of a movie, and I want to solicit your opinion on something. I know it's pretty far out in left field, but do you think there's any manipulation of the weather going on by anybody or any country or at all? Is there manipulation that we don't know about going on?
I look for connections, and I got into a debate just last night with a friend of mine over this who says that's the crackpot view, and I cited the number of serious people in this country that are looking into it. I also heard you say something else, and I look for a connection, something you said earlier. The ham radio signals are very, very bad now.
Oh, they are.
Now, I would want to know, in detail what electromagnetic fields are moving, and if anything from that end of the spectrum could be causing this. And if it is it being manipulated? I see one thing. I've seen hurricanes come from the east right straight into Florida. This year, every hurricane seems to be heading for a place where there's oil refineries or oil drilling. We have Port Everglades here, one of the largest storage tanks of oil in the southeast.
Really?
And it seems like this thing is heading right for that.
Really?
Katrina came in from the other side right towards that. And then if you look at all the lines, they're all in the Gulf heading right towards the oil rigs and stuff. So you have to wonder. They look at you as a crackpot when you say that it's manipulated. But
I know.
But if you start thinking about mind control and stuff, I think it's a very real possibility.
It may be kind of fringy, to think about this sort of thing. I admit it is a little fringy, but we're doing all kinds of other things. And if we were manipulating weather, one thing I know for sure, we wouldn't talk about it.
That's true. It's like when Major and Dean started the remote viewers, it wasn't talked about, and then later it became known. And you have to go back to the Air Force's web page that I understand was taken down, where they had a giant above the clouds, and it said, controlling the weather by 2025. So they didn't expect to start in 2024 to do it. They probably expect it to start now.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a good night. We don't have a lot of time. East of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Yeah, how you doing, Art?
I'm all right, sir. Where are you?
I'm in Dayton, Ohio, right in right field.
All right. And your first name?
My name is Brad.
Okay, Brad. What's up?
I just wanted to mention one real quick thing. I wanted to thank you for replying to my email I sent to you. I emailed you about my cats and how to get them to get along.
Oh, yes. You're very welcome.
Well, I appreciate that. My condolences to Abby Doe.
Thank you.
By the way, and just basically, Art, I just wanted to comment on this whole thing. We've got earthquakes, we've got hurricanes. It's something out of a movie, and it's really amazing to me that all this stuff is going on. I don't have children of my own. I have a niece and nephew, though, that I think of basically as my own. I love them. And it's almost worrisome to think that they're going to have to come up in this world, because I remember back as a child, there was nothing like this.
Well, you're now the second person to say that. It's like something out of a movie with everything that's been going on, out of a book. I won't do the plug that I probably could do out of a movie, a modern movie, a catastrophic movie of something. I mean, what's going on right now is just simply astounding.
Do you see this as an end times kind of event?
Oh, God, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. An end times event, first, they're certainly going to be in touch with, it would appear, the edge of the eye wall, and they've mainly not evacuated from Key West. Strong, hard-headed conks that they are, they're mostly staying in place. Now they're not going to move. There's already water over all the roads connecting them to mainland. So they're where they're going to be. 954 millibars, 115 miles an hour, moving northeast at 18 miles an hour. Wilma. We'll watch it as the night continues. Our guest coming in a moment, Dr. Nick Begich. Now, just quickly, a couple of notes that I want to repeat, and that is Ghost to Ghost. Yes, I will do it on the 31st. On the 30th, we're going to have a very old Ghost to Ghost, back to the 90s, way back. And then on the 31st, I'll be here live. And for that event, I want you to write me a short synopsis of the very best. That's all we're going to put on the air, the very best ghost stories, just a short synopsis and your phone number. And then, of course, you're going to have to be available on that night because I will probably be trying to call you if you sent me a good ghost story. Send those ghost stories to Art Bell at AOL.com or Art Bell at mindspring.com. MINDSPRING. Art Bell, ARTBELL, lowercase, at mindspring.com. Now, Dr. Nick Begich serves as Executive Director of the Lay Institute on Technology. He is the publisher and co-owner of Earth Pulse Press Incorporated. He was twice elected president of both the Alaska Federation of Teachers and the Anchorage Council of Education. He received his doctorate in traditional medicine from the Open International University for Complementary Medicine in 1994. Dr. Begich has also worked as both a tribal administrator and village planner for the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council, a federally recognized American Indian tribe nation based in Alaska. He's written a number of books. Angels Don't Play This Harp, and They Don't. Earth Rising, The Revolution Toward 1,000 Years of Peace. Earth Rising 2, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and the Soul. And then finally, a DVD, Mind Control, A Brave New World, or Enhancing Human Performance Technologies of the 21st Century. So it is indeed an auspicious eve for Dr. Begich to be with us, which he will be in a moment. Dr. Nick Begich wrote Angels Don't Play This Harp, along with a lot of other things, and so he's a veteran in the, I guess, the same sense that I am. He's watched all of this develop very carefully, and here we are, yet again, Dr. Begich. Welcome to the program on a night when a major hurricane is approaching the shores of the United States.
Yeah, well, it's the time of extremes in terms of weather and climate, and I think, we've been talking about this now for, well, at least a decade, you and I. It's continued to
That's right.
Meet our expectations, no matter how bad they might be, and unfortunately, this is just another reflection of some of the expectations a lot of us have had.
All right, Doctor, I'm going to remind you to stay good and close to the phone so we can have a good connection. And let's go back. Let's just spend a few minutes and talk about HARP. A lot of people, in fact, let me go back to last hour and ask you a question. If a person now imagines or speculates that the weather is being in some way manipulated, would you classify that person as a crackpot or being out on the fringe of thinking?
Yeah, I wouldn't, not at all, because there's plenty in the scientific literature, and there's even a couple bills pending in Congress on this whole issue of weather modification. It's been around a long time. It continues to come up. It's just not one that's widely discussed, at least not in mainstream media, except on real rare occasions. And that's, that's a problem. But there's actually a treaty on weather modification and geophysical manipulation, which is things like creating tidal waves and earthquakes and those kinds of things. That goes back to the mid-'70s that we ratified back in 1977. So, the idea of creating these events has been around certainly long enough.
So there's a treaty saying that we, nor others, shall do such a thing. However,
right.
Treaties are not always specifically adhered to, are they?
No, in fact, this one, like many, actually allow for domestic use. So if you can somehow assert that you're experimenting within the boundaries of your own sovereign country, the treaties generally don't apply. And
I see.
That includes chemical and biological treaties and this treaty as well.
Well, and even beyond that, who can say that all will adhere to the
right.
the treaty? If somebody actually comes up with a way to control the course of a hurricane or weather in general, number one, they're not going to talk about it, right?
Well, generally no, but the last three Secretaries of Defense have all suggested we abrogate or dump the old treaty dealing with environmental manipulation because we've advanced in this area. So, they don't talk a lot about it, but just enough to kind of keep that discussion going. And we did that with the ABM treaty once we came up with other concepts in missile defense and rationales for having.
Yes. All right. Let's talk a little about HARP. Go back and talk a little bit about HARP. It's located in your state.
Right.
And I don't know how far. Where is it in Alaska?
It's about 250 miles northeast of Anchorage near a place called Gakona. And it's started out as a 48 antenna field, phased array field. These antennas are about 72 feet tall and then have a cross dipole going the opposite direction at the top. Now there's 180 in the array as of this year, and
oh, really?
A lot more going on. Yeah, they've quadrupled it basically over this last 2 years, and so this year will be the first time they've been able to power it up.
How interesting is that? So when you say power it up, they're going to be aiming how much radio frequency at the ionosphere?
Well, the original goal, they wanted an effective radiated power of 1 billion watts, and that, from what we understand, that would take the full array, which is 360 antennas. So this would get them about halfway there. That's a huge amount of energy. But what's different about this is by manipulating the energy or pulsing the energy, it capitalizes on energy that's already available naturally within the environment, and then based on how that energy reacts with the mechanism on the ground, you can release vastly larger amounts of energy and direct that energy. And that's where the real action is. HARP is sort of like the primer on a bullet. It's got the small amount of energy to release the much more powerful energy that's already there. And that's kind of the idea behind this weather modification and geophysical manipulation.
All right. So we have this situation where most antennas, like the one of the radio station you're listening to right now, folks, radiate from a point and widely disperse the signal so that everybody or as many people as possible can hear it.
Right.
HARP operates the other way around.
Right.
It begins as a wide signal on the ground, narrowing down to a virtual pinpoint of incredible amounts of energy to burn a hole in the atmosphere or ionosphere or what, Doctor? Now, let's talk about the purpose of HARP, the stated purpose of HARP, and then perhaps that which is unstated but kind of known about.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough.
All right, so what's it for? What's it supposed to be?
Well, the old term for these was ionospheric heaters, and you kind of alluded to that opening this up, is it would heat an area of the ionosphere, which begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface, and push that area, say at a 30-mile diameter area, shove it out maybe a couple extra 100 kilometers or more. What then happens is lower atmosphere moves in and fills that space and can be used for intersecting the orbit of a low-orbiting satellite, for instance, where then it encounters atmosphere.
So wait a minute. The ionosphere at 30 miles, you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And it hits it so hard, it bulges out, and then like a balloon sort of pops, and then you can hit things in space or affect them?
Well, in low orbit. So what happens is objects that might be incoming, even space debris, that's one of the things the Soviets pointed out in some of their research, was that the idea of incoming objects that when they hit the atmosphere, they mostly burn up, and you've got about 30 miles to do this. In the case of these systems, you could actually project trajectories and push it out maybe 210 miles, say, or 7 times the distance, and be able to take care of much larger objects. Or for weapons applications, low-orbiting satellites that don't need to encounter friction. One of the side effects of that is pressure systems below or jet streams in the vicinity below that then become altered by virtue of the fact that you've changed the conditions to a pretty dramatic degree.
So again, let's go back. The stated purpose of HARP is, I didn't know it was knocking satellites out of the sky.
Well, one of the things that shows up within the stated goals in the initial papers on the project, the others are communications, interfering and facilitating our own communications, being able to understand the character of the ionosphere and being able to establish and manipulate its character. And the idea there was, for communication purposes, you could disrupt everybody else's communication, but because you're propagating the signal that's doing that, you would be able to carry a signal that would allow your own communication.
Okay, well, this may not bear on what we're talking about, or maybe it does, but right now, you know, actually for going on for some time now, going back to Katrina,
Right.
You know, people in the hurricane area were saying, you know, communications are being jammed here, but actually, Dr. Begich, they weren't being jammed. Communications were, the ionosphere simply was so screwed up. And
Right.
I'm telling you, it's screwed up right now. As we speak, this moment, as this hurricane approaches, the ionosphere is virtually deader than a doornail at 3 megahertz. I mean, it's just astounding. It's just, if you look at the X-ray chart right now, it's flatline, baby. Flatline. And communications are not possible, so they're incredibly disrupted. I also had an email earlier saying HARP was actually active today. Did you hear that?
Yeah, you know, the problem is with the monitoring of HARP is it's not being done routinely and reliably from what I can see, and that's been a problem. But, you know, when you talk about energetic disturbances in the ionosphere and then weather effects and the connection between all these systems, the thing that kind of underlies all of it is the energetic component. You know, even what you were saying in the last hour about viruses, you know, the mutation on viruses occurs often if as a starting point changes in the general energy state that surrounds different things change their way they're constructed and the way they're formed. And a good friend of mine, electrophysiologist from Europe, predicted, you know, some years ago that with changes in the electromagnetic fields of the planet, you would see new strains of viruses and so on start to show up because of mutations. And that, you know, kind of makes sense. And when you look at, you know, man sort of adding in coherent energy in very unique ways and being able to take sort of the dynamo of the planet by being able to manipulate the magnetic field lines, which is really what HARP is all about, and programs like HARP are really all about, are understanding ways to do that for weapons applications. And then there's all kinds
Is that actually stated in the goals, Doctor?
Yeah, it's the idea of manipulating the ionosphere to destabilize it, to create chaos within the system, see how it restabilizes, being able to learn ways to propagate signals through the ionosphere.
But wait a minute. That's taking a system like our ionosphere and saying, hey, let's screw it up and see how it manages to heal itself.
Yeah,
well,
exactly right.
Exactly right.
Exactly right. In fact, you know...
Well, how bright is that?
That's not very bright, you know, and that's why we've been, you know, fighting this thing for as long as we have. And, you know, the European Parliament weighed in on it back in '98, the Russian Duma in 2002, and it continues, you know, to kind of surface here and there. Even in recently, September 30th this year, there was a story in Pravda dealing with HARP, and there was another one in the Hindustan Times the same day this year. You know, so it shows up, but it's not being really looked at in the way that I think it should be, with some real serious treaty dialogue, because the risks, when you look at what's happening across the planet for natural reasons, what we're adding into that mix right now is very, very dangerous. You know, and you've got a lot of history within the United States of looking at these types of systems as something that might be desirable in terms of weapons applications. You know, and then there's a quote that we actually published back in 2000, and it was from a conference on terrorism and weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
And U.S. strategy. It was from April 28, 1997, and it was a DoD press briefing with Secretary of Defense William Cohen, and he said, and I quote, "Others are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism whereby they can alter climate, set off earthquakes and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves," unquote.
Tesla stuff.
Yeah, you know, I mean, really. But think about this. Here's the Secretary of Defense saying, hey, look, you know, these are the weapons of mass destruction we need to be concerned about, back in 1997 when he made that statement. And, you know, and then you look at...
So you got to wonder where we are now. I mean, even with HARP, Dr. Page, let's think about this. HARP is going to take a lot of money.
Yep.
It is taking a lot of money. And so now they're at sort of a medium stage in terms of the power and the antennas. Right. But they're still going forward. Now, if nothing was happening in an encouraging way, if nothing, for example, had happened by now with HARP, to encourage them to know that they're being successful in whatever the hell they're trying to do, they would have stopped the money, but they're going forward.
Well,
so,
in fact, DARPA's got it now. It's not even the Air Force and Navy.
Oh, DARPA has it now. When did that happen?
That was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. DARPA took it over, and it was at the same time that Raytheon sold the underlying company, which owned the patents to the technology.
That alone is astounding. DARPA has taken over the HARP project. How totally?
They run it. It's their deal. And
it's their deal.
And the thing about that is, it's interesting. To be on that subject is the guy that runs DARPA is a guy named Tony Tether. And
Tony Tether?
Yeah, he's a director of DARPA, and he was the first person after the Assistant Secretary of Defense that Bernard Eastland presented his concepts on HARP to in the very beginning.
Remind everybody of what DARPA stands for.
It's a Defense Agency Research. I forget exactly, but it's a research group for the DoD, the Department of Defense, and they do essentially the black projects, the highly classified
black projects.
Once projects go to a certain extent.
Exactly. So, Doctor, then what are we to infer or imagine when DARPA took this over? I mean, what does that probably mean?
Well, several things. They did a few things that we know they were able to accomplish. The Earth-penetrating tomography application, the idea of looking into the Earth or X-raying the Earth by analogy.
Now, folks, this is where they bounce a signal off the ionosphere so damn strong that it comes down and examines the inner Earth somehow. That's an amazing thing by itself.
Yeah, and it's not a lot of energy. It's just a frequency. It's an extremely low-frequency signal, penetrates easily, but they can measure it and get really good profile of what's going on for several kilometers deep. The other thing that, this application of missile defense is where we always have said this is eventually going. I still believe that with HARP. When you think about being able to, this has some applications for the over-the-horizon radar, being able to look around the curvature of the Earth by creating what are called ionospheric mirrors. And without getting into all of that, but just the idea of being able to do that, but then increasing the energy sufficiently to create what's called an EMP or an electromagnetic pulse or surge of energy to knock out the electronics on those incoming objects. And, I don't know whether you've followed this missile defense nonsense. They're building these interceptors up here and putting them in the ground in Alaska. And I'm laughing because it's, another couple $1 billion down the drain because it's a very impractical solution when, in fact, the real solutions are going to be energy-based weapons that literally travel at the speed of light, not some horse-drawn buggy of a missile interceptor. I mean, that's just not the way it's going to work in the long run. And I think the literature supports that. And when you look at HARP, HARP was this idea of taking and looking at how you could manipulate energy for lots of different uses.
It's happening virtually as we speak or within the last hours of when we're speaking, so it's active in doing whatever it's doing. And now we learn that HARP is now under the auspices of DARPA. Isn't that an interesting surprise? Something that started out as sort of a, seemingly very innocent research project has now been turned over to DARPA. And DARPA, besides having a lot of black projects, it gets involved in all these things that really do something. So we should conclude, I think, that HARP really does something. We'll talk more about it in a moment. The measurement of X-rays, when we look at ionospheric phenomena, the X-rays hitting the Earth is almost like the patient died. If you look at the chart, it's just absolutely flatlined, and the shortwave bands, mostly right now, are next to useless. Now, I'm not saying that it's HARP that's doing it, but, gee, isn't it reasonable to have a suspicion something burning holes in the ionosphere and trying to affect the ionosphere, perhaps, as you pointed out, in a negative way, is doing it?
Yeah, it's certainly absolutely plausible. One of the advantages of these systems, as they're discussed in the military literature, is the idea of plausible deniability. The idea of affecting weather systems or affecting communication systems. And then, being able to blame it essentially on space weather phenomena or other phenomena, really a lot of what this is about. But at the same time, sort of the understanding of one thing leads to another, and unfortunately, with this facility and facilities like it, huge risks are taken on because you can affect something in one area and have a dramatic and unforeseen.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Huge risks. Now, that's a big phrase. Huge risks. Now, who is being put at a huge risk?
Well, everyone is at some level. I mean, because here's the thing. If you trigger instabilities, by manipulating energy within the planet itself, and you trigger instabilities that maybe otherwise wouldn't be released in the same way, say an earthquake fault zone, and this is some of the stuff that Cohen was talking about, the idea that, if you look around earthquake regions, there's been this recording of low-frequency signals surrounding earthquakes and even volcanic eruptions. And then there's, certain ionospheric phenomena that are connected to weather systems. There's a lot of things that start to connect all these energetic systems together. And so when you start inputting energy in a much different form in one end, expecting one result, you may get many other results you don't anticipate. And that's where the risks lie. I mean, the Earth-penetrating tomography application, this idea of looking into the Earth, utilizing essentially the effects of resonant energy that goes through, easily transits the Earth, easily reflects a signal back, but at the same time could set up standing waves that trigger an increase in energy through a resonance effect that actually cause an earthquake.
All right. Doctor, who is overseeing the scientists who are taking these risks? Who is the overseer to ensure that we don't take a crazy risk? I really...
Well, that's the problem. Really, because you have DARPA in control of the overall project, you have lots of, innocently so, in many cases, contributing scientists that are developing some narrow part of this research and understanding of this research. And
so there's nobody to tell the DARPA guy not to pull the third switch.
Right. Right. And, when you think about it, some of the references in the literature, the military's own literature refers to this as sort of the plasma lab in the sky because of what they can do with it. And, some of us, kind of look at that a little differently because of how important this is. I mean, for some of the weapons application, the idea of sending energy up and using the magnetic field lines of the planet itself as sort of wave guides is one of the applications for missile defense systems. And so, that changes its very character. And, there's things going on within the Earth that are already being noted. I mean, pole shift, as an example, is a reflection of magnetic field line changes. Here we are dumping more energy into a disturbed system.
A very good point. Could something like this be the trigger for a pole shift?
Sure, why not? Here's the thing.
Great.
The straw on the camel's back, and that's what so many people are looking at to already stress systems. And when you talk about the energy of hurricanes, as an example, that's a tremendous amount of energy involved in the generation of hurricanes, but the mechanism has to do with ocean temperature heating and the relationships between ocean temperature and the way weather fronts form and currents move. But when you start to look at factors on the planet right now contributing to the effects of global warming or effects on these systems, there's claims have been made going back to an article in the Wall Street Journal in 1997. It was November 13th, and they were talking about blowing out the smog coming into Asia from the Indonesian fires with a artificially created cyclone the Russians offered.
That's right.
That's
right.
Not. I mean, why should anyone discount what the Wall Street Journal is reporting as plausible science? And not just them, but you look at the military's own papers on the subject of what they call owning the weather or controlling the battle space in this way. And it's about both communications and about the actual manipulation of the weather systems themselves.
Let's talk about manipulation for a second.
Sure.
One might observe, Doctor, that if we are presently manipulating the weather, we're really doing a rotten job.
Yeah.
Because look at what's happened this year. Hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. If we could move them, you'd think we'd have done it.
Yeah, and here's the thing about all that, and there's been a lot of speculation about what's going on with weather systems, but what is happening on kind of an ad hoc basis is this sort of experimentation within the boundaries of these treaties. But the idea is you can't localize weather to political boundaries because weather flows where the currents go, and that has nothing to do with lines we draw on a map.
Now, a sensitive question. Do you suppose, Doctor, that if they felt they had it within their power, with HAARP or whatever else they've got up their sleeves these days, to increase or manipulate the size or intensity or even direction of a hurricane, that they would they go ahead and do it? Would they take the risk? Would there be nobody there to say no?
Well, yeah. Let me put it this way: when you start looking at all these kinds of technologies, you can go back to some of the writings of guys like Zbigniew Brzezinski when he wrote Between Two Ages, and he talked about weather manipulation. He was, national security advisor to President Carter later in his career. But in the early 70s, he basically said, look, all these things were going to come about. Weather modification issues were in that, as well as, a lot of other technologies that have eventually come to pass. But he said basically the temptation to use them, would probably outweigh any good sense.
The temptation to use them would outweigh any good sense.
Yeah, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the idea of these technologies being utilized, there's a lot of salivating in military circles about controlling a battle environment. Think about waging a covert war where you either create drought conditions or flooding conditions for sustained periods of time and the effect on populations, and you can see the advantage of being able to do that when you want to wage a war without announcing it. And our government's been fairly well known for that over the last 50 or 60 years in any case.
Well, do we have any idea of how far we've come? I assume that if there were weather modification technologies that are presently working, we wouldn't say one word about it. So we don't really know how far we've come. There's been this great giant silence about this. We just don't hear about the black projects that are trying to control the weather, so we have no idea how far they've come or haven't, right?
No, we can only see the tip of the iceberg because there's only small references. There's one paper. It's called "Weather as a Force Multiplier: Owning the Weather by 2025," and
right.
That's an Air Force document. There's other references that can be pointed to. That really kind of lay a foundation. But the idea, and then you look at the legislation. There's a Senate Bill 517 and a House Resolution 2995, and both are to establish Weather Modification Operations and Research Board in the United States. And this is for looking at civilian and military applications of weather modification.
Well, I was, if you look at the recent hurricane damage, we have been damaged probably beyond the wildest expectations of any terrorist out there right now.
Sure.
They couldn't have done a better job.
Right, exactly.
So could this be being used against us? Is there the possibility, for example, that other countries have not been so much adhering to this treaty and they've plowed ahead and they've caused some of this?
Sure, and the other part of it is not everybody signed on. There's only 60 countries.
What about the Chinese?
No, I don't know that they are signed on, actually. I know the Russians are. But the point is, when you start talking about weather modification, somebody had blamed the Russians in the case of Katrina, and they got all offended by it. But at the same time, they acknowledged their own programs.
Somebody did blame the Russians?
Yeah, it actually it came out. Some American meteorologist, Scott Stevens, actually did, and Pravda then responded with a story in September 30th this year, 2005. People can look it up, and it's USA and Russians supposedly developed secret meteorological weapons. American meteorologist Scott Stevens has recently wrote.
And Pravda responded.
Oh yeah. It was it was a story.
And what did they? No, we didn't, or what?
Yeah, it was kind of like that, and it was saying that it was referencing back to you remember Zaranovsky talking about these really wild weapons that they had, that they could create floods in America and do all this stuff by just changing the gravitational fields of the planet slightly. This is exactly what Pravda quotes within this article, which is exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about when we're talking about HAARP, is you're manipulating it slightly, but that slightly has the butterfly effect, if you will, a small input, big output. But
that's a whole thing about HAARP, isn't it? Small.
Yeah.
Isn't that exactly what they intend with HAARP? HAARP, a small, relatively small input, and then a spreading domino effect or butterfly effect or whatever you want to call it.
Right, what it's actually is using kind of the equation. I think we used it once when you and I have talked about this. Is it's like dominoes, stacking them up from wherever you are all the way to Paris, and you may increase them in size a little bit each time. So by the time you get to Paris, you got one the size of the Eiffel Tower, and you can kind of flick the first one with a half an ounce weight, and then by the time it gets to the Eiffel Tower, you crush the Eiffel Tower with this giant domino. Now, it wasn't a little half-ounce weight that got discharged. It's the gravitational energy that got picked up along the way. So think about HAARP as picking up energy from the ionosphere along the way, if you will, and then being able to manipulate that for very specific uses. Now that's where you get this incredible multiplier effect, because the ionosphere has more energy potential than everything generating on the planet at once.
Well, Doctor, do you remember in many previous programs, HAARP was originally kind of more of an open... what's the way to put this?
That's what they said, but remember, how many times have they taken up the invitation to come on and have a chat about it?
True. Now, since then, it has become far blacker, now finally in DARPA's hands, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And what do you think the odds are now of getting any viable, real information out of them?
Pretty much
slim and none, huh?
Yeah, but here's what shows up. This is interesting. Some of the other branches of the military, occasionally, in trying to justify their programs, have made reference to HAARP as for communications and communication disruption. There's something that shows up in the Army literature. There's something that shows up on Army literature dealing with weather modification, as an example. And there was a follow-on paper done by Dr. Eastland, the inventor of the HAARP system, for the European Space Agency on knocking out the energy in tornadoes, and then also one done using HAARP systems for that, and then one done for NASA and FEMA, interestingly enough, a few years back, for knocking out the energy in tornadoes using a laser or a space-based system for accomplishing the same kind of thing by being able to manipulate heat energy as the basic mechanism behind, how that sort of shearing action of tornadoes is created.
Yes, Doctor. Well, we had the Russian boast. Now, do you think that, what do you think about that boast? I mean, they said they could create a cyclone, and that was years and years ago.
Yeah, I think
they could do it by satellite. Now, how do you imagine they might do something like that?
Well, I think they have figured out, how to trigger those kinds of instabilities or create heat releases within the ocean sufficiently to generate those kinds of events. And that's really what it's about, I think. Maybe,
Doctor, enough to create a low-pressure system, or to start, a low-pressure system begins, very innocently. And before you know it, then it's a tropical depression, and then it's a hurricane, and then it's killing people and causing billions of dollars of damage. Now, do you think that concentrated energy, for example, in the Eastern Caribbean somewhere could actually create a tropical condition, begin to lower the millibars and start this butterfly effect that ends up, in these monster storms?
Yeah, I think perhaps. And, at the same time, I think adding energy into an already existing system is possible. And, this creates other kinds of problems. And, when the Earth is already demonstrating a huge instability, and then you start adding in the kind of energy in the forms that we're talking about,
yes,
that's where the real risks are. I mean, you may be looking at a storm front and dealing with a problem there, or attempting to, and might in fact trigger some other unexpected event. And this is where, we're trying to literally manipulate systems now that have tremendous impact on humankind, and we're capable of doing it. But we don't have the capability of modeling the whole system and understanding clearly the consequences of those actions. And that's why the military shouldn't be in this business at all, in my view, because it's not an opportunity for legitimate scientists from other disciplines across the board to take a look and make sure things are being done, if they're being done at all, safely. And there's some applications of Eastland's ideas with these ionospheric heaters that isn't even being looked at, that actually might be the most interesting of all. And one of them was the actually creating chemical reactions in the upper atmosphere that would knock out specific pollutants using radio frequency energy, or adding in ozone by triggering the kind of reactions necessary for that. And
so there could be an upside to this research. Who knows? Even they don't know.
Right. And the problem is they've never had the ability to do what they can do with radio frequency energy such as HAARP, and there's this big gap between the science is primarily because of compartmentalization in military research, where one branch really doesn't see what the other's doing, which, when you're dealing with big energy manipulations, that's where a whole lot of other scientists need to be involved when it involves the entire planet's energetic system. And that's the stuff of HARP, and some of the larger weapons technologies are being developed today are energy-based systems that have potentially profound health as well as environmental effects.
Well, I'm still thinking what you said earlier, the idea that, let's screw up the ionosphere and see if it heals itself,
right?
And how.
Well, it was the way they put it is, let's create a condition to where it goes into chaos and then stabilizes at some other level and see where that level is. You know,
let's
that's kind
create
of
chaos.
Yeah, and just to put the system into a chaotic condition and then see how it restabilizes when you switch the device off or manipulate it in some other fashion.
Well, if they really were after chaos, baby, they've got it.
Maybe. And, here, this is one of the things that some of the other scientists have said, that we've collaborated with over the years, is the idea that during times of extreme solar activity, and then you utilize a system like that, then you might even trigger some things that are even, vastly more powerful. At the same time, you're getting huge surges of energy potentials coming into our system anyway.
So we all should be very happy that there's an oversight committee looking into each one of these things before they're done to make sure we don't make a mistake. All right, correction to everything I just gave you. It was all correct with the exception of the fact that winds are now 120 miles an hour. In the latest advisory, winds have hit 120 miles an hour. So it's continuing to increase as it approaches the coast, about 50 miles or so from Key West. Now, this is a horrible scenario for Key West because the majority of the people in Key West did not evacuate. And there's kind of a strange story there. The so-called conks are very hard-headed, and they don't like to leave. That's one. And another is there's a grotto, a religious grotto on Key West. And there was a nun who had promised that as long as the grotto remained, that Key West would not feel the effects, the major effects or the direct effects of any more hurricanes as long as the grotto remains. So some people take that as an article of faith, and it looks like the very worst now is headed for Key West. In fact, CNN has a reporter barely able to stand in Key West right now as the worst part of the storm, no doubt, approaches. People are on their knees in order to remain in view of the camera. So it's pretty wild time, folks. All this approaching our coast. We're talking with Dr. Nick Begich in Alaska, not very far from the project we're talking about, this HARP project that sends beams of energy, radio frequency energy, into the ionosphere for a number of possible goals. And Dr. Begich, I've got a note here. I get these little computer fast blasts as we go.
All right, great.
And this one is, let me see, who's it from? From Wellington, a PhD at Cambridge, who says, quote, "The following is taken directly from the official government HARP site. Quote, the HARP program is completely unclassified. There are no classified documents pertaining to HARP. The environmental impact process, EIP documents, have always been available." Any response?
Well, the environmental impact statement documents, I have a set of them, and they really just deal with the ground disturbance. They don't deal with what's going on with the energy itself, except in a pretty cursory way. And that's the root of the underlying issue that's been raised by us and as well as many others from the scientific community, both in Europe and around the world. And and it's been the idea that energy manipulations for these purposes should be restricted, and I agree with that. And it's what the research is showing more and more is that very small amounts of energy within certain window frequencies can trigger all kinds of events, both within our own physiology, which is one of the big concerns, as well as act as triggering events for these kinds of geophysical disturbances. And it's not just us saying it. In fact, it's not us saying it at all. We've just taken a huge amount of literature, and in the course of taking a look at that literature, primarily the government's own work on their own project and disclosing it, what you see is a very complex system designed for a number of purposes, all of which are pretty exciting from a military perspective.
Doctor, a number of years ago, we began these series of interviews on HAARP and things like it. How much access do you have now to be able to talk to people in the .net? It's there 24 hours a day. One of the receivers is the Pahrump receiver, which is located at KNYE Radio and utilizes the KNYE tower. And you can listen to shortwave. Now, warning, there may not be too much shortwave to listen to right now. The solar conditions at the moment are really, really unusual. They are so unusual. In fact, if you look at the X-ray chart, it's flat-lined. I mean, baby, there's nothing going on. It is just flat-lined, and the band sounds just like that, so it's very difficult for anybody to talk to anybody anywhere, but it can be done. So you can have fun with that. It's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. www.smeter.net, SMETER.net. Now, we just got back from a trip to Idaho, took the RV up to Idaho, and had a blast. Went to see a friend of mine, Mac, and Boyd and his family, and we had a blast, so we're getting out a little bit. Coming up next week is going to be a kind of a fun affair, I think. Ghost to Ghost is not one day next week, but it's 2 days. Here's what we're going to do. On the 30th, we're going to have a very old Ghost to Ghost. They're going back, I think, to the mid-'90s or early 90s. I don't know, way back, and they're getting a Ghost to Ghost because those stories, of course, are eternal, aren't they? And then on the 31st, I will be here doing a live Ghost to Ghost. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about that live Ghost to Ghost, all right? Continuing program notes here. What I would like you to do is to send me a short synopsis of your ghost story, the most titillating part, so that I can understand what I'm dealing with, and include your phone number, please, because we will repeat last year's successful effort at Ghost to Ghost, and I'm going to give you my email addresses, so run and get a pencil or a pen, please, and send me a short synopsis of your ghost story. Only the very best, scariest, wildest stories are told. And the way this is accomplished, by your sending me a little bit of email, including your phone number, and I will call you. All right, so any emails with your short synopsis and phone number should be sent to artbell, ARTBELL, at AOL.com or artbell@mindspring.com. That's probably the main one, artbell@mindspring.com, MINDSPRING, artbell@mindspring.com. And again, include a synopsis and your phone number, and if it's a good one, we'll call you on the 31st, and that's how we're going to do Ghost to Ghost. That, and of course open lines as well. But we are going to rely heavily on your input, so make it good and include your phone number, and who knows, you could be part of this year's Ghost to Ghost program, something I've been doing for an awful lot of years now. In a moment, we'll look at this horrible thing, this horrid thing bearing down at this very hour on Florida, the Keys, and then Florida. Coming up. CNN, of course, into full-time coverage, the latest on Wilma at this hour. at 24.5 north and 83.6 west, or about 115 miles west of Key West, Florida, which is now beginning to take quite a battering. Winds are now 115 miles an hour. It's been upgraded to a Category 3.
And the indication of that, I'm going to take some pictures of it as I leave, and I hope it's not pictures of cars that don't have owners, but there's all these automobiles parked up on the little bridge that comes down into Everglades City.
Mm-hmm.
They're parked up there like rats that have been placed on higher ground, if you will, and that to me means that the owners are still here in Everglades City, which is about 3 feet above sea level on average.
3 feet above sea level. And what is the projected storm surge there?
Anywhere from maybe 12 to 15 feet.
12 to 15 feet. So, in other words, you could get as much as 12 feet of water right there.
Yes, we can have 12, maybe 15 feet of water rising in here, coming in rapidly. That'll have some waves on top of it, perhaps. And it's just not a good thing to be in. I learned that.
That's
the damage after Katrina.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So the residents of that area have all parked their cars. You would judge how far above sea level?
Well, those cars are not very much above sea level at all. They are parked up on this bridge, so they are maybe another 8 or 9 feet above sea level.
I see.
Where they are. So the cars may not get damaged or washed away, but the people's homes with those people may be. So I'm really worried about that.
I know there are a lot of areas that didn't really evacuate this time. Some people seem to have this feeling that, I don't know, this storm wasn't going to be much. And after the battering over Cozumel in that area of Mexico, I think people thought it was going to beat itself to death. What is going on with this storm? Intensification, I guess, right?
It's an amazing hurricane, isn't it, Art? It was the strongest hurricane ever recorded pressure-wise in the Western Hemisphere, with a 881 or 882 millibar air pressure at one point,
right,
with a 2-mile wide eye, and then it buried itself over the...
Here in South Florida, or some part of the southern U.S., is getting a strong hurricane. Any chance you're doing the weather manipulation? He says. I know it's the topic for tonight's show. Well, to some degree, that's true. Coming up in the next hour, we'll have Nick Begich here, Dr. Begich, who wrote, of course, among other things, Angels Don't Play This Harp. Now, I'll have a lot of questions about that, as you can imagine. It's been a while since we've talked. The Bell family is just spiffy. That would be Art, myself, Ramona, Yeti, Comet, Shadow, Dusty, Abydos. And by the way, Abydos is in tonight's Hamcam slot. That's Abby lying right on Ramona last night. So that's as early a picture as last night. Now, take a good look at Abydos, because after about 8 o'clock tomorrow, his maleness, his male identity is due to be modified. So these are the closing hours of his continued possession of, I kind of feel sorry for him. Any male. Anyway, so there he was last night. What an unusual little cat that is. He doesn't make a sound, folks. He's never made any sound other than when he wanted to come in the house, and then he screamed bloody murder. Since then, 2.5 months, the most he does, he goes, he grunts. That's about it. That's all Abydos ever says. Now, I would like to invite you all, as I have in the past, to listen to amateur radio, ham radio, at a very unique site called www.smeter.net. That's S-M-E-T-E-R. Hurricane moving northeast at 18 miles an hour. The barometric pressure, 957 millibars, and I understand stabilizing at that, so it may remain exactly where it is, at Category 3. Now, you may recall from previous programs, I've turned to Mark Suddeth, who is a hurricane hunter. You've got to be out of your mind, in my opinion, to do these kinds of things, though I certainly did earlier in my life, didn't I? Mark was in Naples, Florida, but I guess he decided that wasn't dangerous enough, so now we find him, I believe, in Everglades City. Mark, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Art.
Is that right, Everglades City?
Yes, temporarily. We've come down here to rewind a tape that is inside of one of these storm case boxes, excuse me, that we have learned a lot of lessons since Katrina. We lost all of those cases that we set up during Katrina.
All right, to remind the audience, what Mark does is he sets up these little, pods or cases that he leaves with video and other recording devices to, actually be in the hurricane and take the brunt of it and record whatever it's going to record. Generally correct, Mark?
Yes, that's exactly right. These are sort of remotely operated cameras and weather instruments. That's the idea, is to leave them out in a remote location and let them take the beating and not me. And we're going to go back. We're in Everglades City now, just kind of rewinding the very long 9-hour tape in one of these items, one of these boxes. And so far, as I drive around Everglades City, there's no flooding yet whatsoever.
Well, Mark, it's coming. Now, where are you that city, Everglades City, probably is not going to be the place to be come about dawn, is it?
Right. Not going to be a place to be near dawn. I think the storm surge is going to come in rather quickly, like it did during Katrina. The people that are still here, and there are people here, we